of the trial roster with the team's code. I don't know if that could be put in the chat.
I believe the trial roster was supposed to have already been sent, or at least our coaches said that they had filled it out, so none of us have it. I don't know about the other team, but none of us have it.
The courtroom monitor has it, so I will send it your way in the chat.
Okay. Confirm that the video this proceeding is being recorded, and both sides have approved the taping of the round. I'll just remind everybody that no recesses will be allowed with the exception of those for a health emergency. I'll ask the scoring panelists if they have any reason to believe in judging either team. If you do have a concern, if you could note that in the chat.
Shane went away.
If there are any disputes arising out of this trial, that must be reported in accordance with the competition rules. Time requirements will be considered in scoring individual performances. I want to confirm that no coach or team member other than the timekeeper is present at this trial on WebEx. And I'll ask the people to introduce the participating team members, attorneys, and witnesses. For the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Grace Admire. I'll be performing the opening statement, the direct examination of Jordan Markowitz, and the cross of Avery Becker.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Samantha Kemper. I will be doing the direct examination of Kyle Kuzak, the cross-examination of Taylor Perkins, and delivering the closing statement.
Thank you. And the final attorney for the people, please enter your appearance.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Olivia Else. I'll be performing the direct examination of Alex Cifuentes and the cross-examination of Professor Blake Van Owen.
Thank you. For the defense.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel. My name is Claire Kenny, and today, along with my co-counsel, we will be representing Avery Becker in the State versus Avery Becker. I will be performing the direct examination of Professor Blake Van Owen, the cross-examination of Kyle Kuzak, and I will be giving the closing arguments. Permission for my co-counsel to introduce themselves.
Permission granted.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Olivia Aguirre, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Avery Becker and the cross-examination of Detective Markowitz.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Garrison Ebel. I will be delivering the opening statement, the direct examination of Taylor Perkins, as well as the cross-examination of Alex Cifuentes. Your Honor, may I have permission for my witnesses to introduce themselves?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Galilea Naposas, and today I am Taylor Perkins.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Charlie Jones, and today I am Avery Becker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jones.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Grace Trembath, and today I am Professor Blake Van Owen.
Thank you. The witnesses for the state, would they like to introduce themselves?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Caden Bergdorf, and today I will be Jordan Markowitz.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Emily Duran, and I am Kyle Kuzak.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Malia Bauer, and I am Alex Cifuentes.
Good afternoon, Ms. Bauer. You have a very nice voice, but a very soft voice. So if you don't mind during the trial speaking up so we can hear you. I will give the members an oath. Team members, please raise your right hands. Do you promise that the presentation you're about to give, you will will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Witnesses, do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to your witness statements, that you will not add material facts or opinions which are not contained in the case problem, and that you will follow the rules and procedures of the mock trial competition? If so, say I do.
I do.
All right. Scoring panelists, do you promise to adjudicate the mock trial competition as fairly and objectively as possible in accordance with the facts, procedures, and rule of the mock trial competition? If so, please unmute yourself and state I do.
I do.
I do.
Thank you. Are there any preliminary matters the parties would like to take up?
Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution has several preliminary matters.
Okay.
The prosecution asks that counsel will be able to remain seated during examinations, and the same for opposing counsel.
So granted.
Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution also asks that counsel be allowed to stand during openings and closings.
That'll be granted. And
Thank
that
you.
would be
And
granted
lastly,
for the defense as well.
Thank you. And lastly, the prosecution asks that exhibits may be displayed upon the screen for the witness prior to examination, and the same for opposing counsel.
Yes, that would be granted. I was supposed to review that with you. You don't have to ask for permission to publish. Well, you can use the exhibits, you can share the exhibits when you are having your witness identify the exhibit, and then if you would ask permission to publish to the jury, realizing that the jury will already be seeing the exhibit just for practice purposes. Is there anything else from the state?
No further preliminary matters from the prosecution, Your Honor.
Any preliminary matters for the defense?
The defense has several more. We'd like to request permission for our attorneys to sit as well during openings and closings if necessary, based on the environments they have to perform within. And
yes, that'll be permitted.
Thank you. We also request that the witnesses be deemed on the stand when seated and appearing virtually on the Zoom screen.
Yes, that would be granted.
And this is probably around what my other opposing attorney has said, but we seek the court's permission to deem any exhibit that's shared by means of screen sharing to have been constructively handed to opposing counsel previously to its screen sharing.
Yes, that will be presumed.
And finally, we ask that the court defendant may constructively sit at the counsel table for purposes of conferring via Zoom chat with counsel, and thus serving as the defense advisory witness.
Is there any objection to that request for the state?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Defendant will be allowed to remain at counsel table as an advisory witness. And before we get started, it looks like somebody needs the scoring link. I don't know if the moderator, Miss Staub, is she here? Miss Stubb? Does the scoring panelist, Swayski, have the scoring link?
No.
Do you have it?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'll send it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll begin with the opening statement. Does the state wish to present an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may begin.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing and co-counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Over the course of today's trial, I ask you to keep just 3 words in mind: wrath, revenge, and repercussions. Now today you will hear a lot of different conglomerate of evidence from both the prosecution and the defense regarding what really happened to beloved mock trial coach Mackenzie Brackman on March 6, 2020. But as we head into today's trial, 2 things are certain. On March 6, 2020, the home of Mackenzie Brackman was broken into, and now Mackenzie Brackman is dead. This break-in has led to the ultimate repercussion. the murder of Brackman. Now, our jury instructions have two very important elements that my co-counsel and I have the burden to prove to you today. Jury instruction number 7 states the defendant, Avery Becker, must have knowingly and unlawfully entered a dwelling with the intent to commit a crime. And jury instruction number 8 states that in the course of committing these crimes, Avery Becker caused the death of Mackenzie Brackman. Now, over the course of today, you will learn of how Becker's wrathful past and his impulsive craving for revenge led her to commit a crime. And regardless of Becker's regrets, this crime ended in murder. And you will hear about an alibi that is flawed and fictitious. And from it, ladies and gentlemen, you will get to ensure the final repercussion: accountability. The prosecution will not only provide you with 2 credible expert witnesses, but a peer and friend of Avery herself, Alex Fuentes. Alex will tell you firsthand of how Avery Becker's sloth mentality and cocky attitude eventually led to Avery Becker's downfall on the Colorado High School mock trial team. Screenshots of Becker and Cifuentes' conversations will show how this caused her to lash out in an act of vandalism. An act of vandalism, you will learn, on the car of the very coach who wouldn't let her back on the mock trial team. The very coach who was murdered merely days later. You will hear from expert witness Jordan Markowitz, a homicide detective with over 12 years of experience. Markowitz will explain his detailed records of Becker's phone location, as well as the calls that were made to Becker's phone on that day. Markowitz will provide an expert opinion based on the boundless amounts of circumstantial evidence that this case provides. And you will also hear from Kyle Kuzak, another expert in crime scene reconstruction. Ms. Kuzak will tell you how she saw the crime scene firsthand, unlike defense witness Blake Van Owen. Ms. Kuzak will also describe her tedious 5-step crime scene reconstruction process and paint a picture for the jury of just what happened on March 6, 2020. Then, in contrast, the defense will present to you 3 biased witnesses who they will use to try to piece together an alibi for their defendant, Avery Becker. You will hear from Blake Van Owen, a private investigator who is being personally paid to testify before you in court today. You will see that Blake Van Owen's claims are based upon secondary evidence alone. Blake Van Owen never saw the scene of the crime untampered. You will hear from Taylor Perkins, the closest friend of Avery's on the mock trial team. Taylor Perkins will testify about Avery Becker's rash, inflated ego, and she will testify about how she even quit the mock trial team for Avery Becker's sole benefit. Then, throughout Becker's testimony, you will learn about his reckless, emotionally charged actions, and you will hear Becker's baseless, biased alibi. Now, the defense will probably paint Mr. Becker as just another teenager who makes mistakes. But this description is an incredible understatement. His actions have caused irreparable damage, and now he must face the repercussions. Ladies and gentlemen, through the course of today's trial, you will see how Avery's wrath led them to a scheme to get revenge. And that revenge is sweet for a wrathful teenager like Becker. But this time, it did not end in a damaged Porsche. It did not end in the tears of Avery Becker. It ended in blood-stained hands. Ladies and gentlemen, this wrath and revenge must result in repercussions in order for justice to prevail. Now, I asked that today you do your duty as jurors and listen to the circumstantial evidence that this case provides. And at the end of this case, my co-counsel, Samantha Kemper, will come before you and ask you to impose these repercussions through finding the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the defense wish to present an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May the defense proceed?
Yes, you may.
Reckless, rushed, guilty until proven innocent. Members of the jury, do those sound like the descriptors of an honest, well-looked-into police investigation? Today, we are going to show you the reality of Detective Markowitz's investigation and the falsity of the prosecution's story. Today, we are going to tell you about Avery Becker. Avery graduated from Colorado High School in June 2020. But instead of celebrating and moving on to the next stage of his life, the police chose Avery as their suspect for a felony murder and second-degree burglary. Today, members of the jury, it is your job to listen to the facts of the case. The burden of the proof lies on the prosecution. They must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Becker is guilty of all these crimes. And per jury instruction number 2, if you cannot find evidence of Avery's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find him not guilty. Now, members of the jury, you will hear from the prosecution today about their investigation and their conclusions. We will show you that those fragile conclusions came only from faulty evidence, mistakes, and an urgent desire to condemn a suspect. You will hear that the police spoke with only one mock trial team member, where they received their only and first suspect, Avery Becker. They never looked into other suspects who had significant reasons to be angry with the victim, and they relied on video clips that show only a person in a mask entering and leaving the victim's house, and relied on potentially faulty text messages and cell site data. But let's start at the beginning. You will hear from 3 witnesses today. Avery Becker himself, Taylor Perkins, Avery's best friend who was with Avery on the day of Coach Brackman's murder. And finally, private investigator and Professor Blake Van Owen. Avery will tell you that yes, he and Brackman did have arguments with each other, but he would never commit murder over petty squabbles. You will see Avery is a talented student, a good friend, and a lover of mock trial. But he was also a high schooler, and high schoolers make mistakes, like angrily drawing on a car with what turns out to be permanent marker. Members of the jury, you will see that Avery could not have been pushed so far to commit murder. Furthermore, you'll hear from both Avery and his best friend, Taylor Perkins, that on the day of the murder, they were looking for Avery's lost phone, scouring the places they had been the night before. You'll see that neither of them could have been on the scene of the crime. Finally, you will hear from Professor and private investigator Blake Van Owen that the police came to the easy conclusion regarding the murder of Mackenzie Brackman. She will show you the assumptions made by the crime scene reconstructionist Kyle Cusack and the mistakes made by Detective Markowitz. She will explain to you that yes, there is physical, on-scene evidence that an intruder broke into the home of the victim, but that the police fit this evidence to Avery instead of letting it lead to their victim. In regards to the location of Avery Becker's cell phone, Van Owen will share that the cell tower data cannot definitively locate a phone, and that Detective Markowitz never looked at any cell site data other than Avery's. Again, members of the jury, the prosecution has the burden of proof today. They must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Becker was at Mackenzie Brackman's house on March 6th, 2020, that he committed criminal mischief, committed second-degree burglary, and, in doing so, murdered Mackenzie Brackman. And so, members of the jury, as you listen to Avery and Taylor tell you the story of March 6th, as you listen to Professor Van Owen explain all of the discrepancies of the investigation, you must ask yourself, is Avery innocent until proven guilty? Or has this investigation made him guilty until proven innocent? Thank you.
Thank you. Prosecution may call their first witness.
The prosecution calls Detective Jordan Markowitz to the stand.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Detective Markowitz. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Jordan Markowitz, Markowitz.
I'd like to start off by talking about your career and your experience. When did you begin your career?
I have been working for the Denver Police Department for 13 years and as a detective for 7 of those.
And what did you work as following your 7 years as a detective?
Well, I'm currently in my job as a detective, still with the Denver Police Department, and I have special certifications in cell phone tower data and the forensic analysis of that cell phone data.
How did you obtain these certifications?
I obtained these certifications at a course that, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I obtained these certifications at a course that required some examinations and some lectures and just different stuff together.
How many times in your career do you say that you have interpreted cell tower data?
Oh, hundreds.
And Detective Markowitz, who do you work for now?
I work for the Denver Police Department.
Have you ever been to a homicide scene?
Yes, I have. Very many.
Your Honor, I would ask the court to recognize Detective Markowitz as an expert in call detail records, interpretation of cell tower data, and homicide investigation under Rules 702 and 703.
Any objection from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Detective Markowitz will be qualified as an expert witness in that specialized knowledge.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Markowitz, now I'd like to talk about your work on the murder at 444 South Flower Street. Were you at the scene on March 6, 2020?
Yes, I was.
And when you arrived upon the scene, did you see a victim?
Yes, I did. He was in the front door, or just a bit inside of the front door, which was open, and was how the authorities were called.
And how was the victim situated by the front door?
The victim was face down in a pool of his own blood, as if trying to leave the door as his feet were away from the door and his head towards it.
And did you notice anything about the victim's body?
Objection.
The victim,
The objection?
Leading question.
Response?
Your Honor, I simply asked if you noticed anything about the leading question. I don't believe about the victim's body. I don't believe it was the leading question.
The leading question is typically one where the answer is suggested by the question. The court finds this is not a leading question and that objection will be overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I repeat my question?
Yes.
Did you notice anything about the victim's body?
the victim had a stab wound in his left shoulder area that was deep enough and large enough and was deemed the fatal wound to the victim.
And what do you presume that the victim was stabbed with?
There was a knife covered in the victim's blood that was the size to have stabbed the victim in the fatal wound that we have used as the murder weapon in this case.
Objection. Do you have any experience with murder weapons, and are you a doctor?
Hold on just a minute. There's been an objection. What is the basis of the objection?
Lack of experience to prove how he was actually murdered. He is not a doctor.
So the objection is that calls for speculation?
Rule 702, medical experience.
Response?
Your Honor, the witness is qualified as an expert in homicide investigation, which does include implying how a victim was killed. I do believe that is within the rule of 702 and within his qualifications.
The court will overrule the objection and find that, well, I would ask the attorney to lay more of a foundation as how he knows that it's a murder weapon. I will sustain the objection for now, but allow the counsel to lay further foundation.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Markowitz, is it what is presumed about how the victim died?
The victim was stabbed with a knife.
Thank you. And when you arrived at the scene, did you enter the home?
I did. I entered through the back door, went around the gate after I saw the open door to investigate all entrances to the house.
And did you ever enter the kitchen in the home?
I did enter the kitchen. The kitchen is immediately inside from the back door, and that is how I entered the house.
Did you notice anything when you were in the kitchen?
Well, I noticed that the house was in slight disarray, although not something that I could have used for anything because it could have just been the normal state of the house. There was an open knife drawer with an eclectic assortment of knives and a knife block with one knife missing that was the size of the murder weapon.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, sorry. Would you recognize a photograph of the drawer if you saw it?
I would.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 7 be shown to the witness.
Yes.
Detective Markowitz, do you recognize this photograph?
I do.
And what is this photograph?
This is the photograph of the knife drawer in the victim's home as it was when I entered the residence.
Is this a true and accurate depiction of the knife drawer in Mackenzie Brackman's home at the time that you entered the residence?
It is.
Your Honor, I now ask that Exhibit 7 be admitted into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Exhibit 7 will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Markowitz, is there anything that you noticed about the knives in this drawer?
Well, the biggest thing to notice is there's not much to notice in a pattern. They are all varied and are of many different brands and types.
Objection, relevancy?
If I may respond, Your Honor?
Response?
The witness has already answered the question.
What's the relevancy of the question of the placement of the knives?
Your Honor, the witness has testified that there was a knife by the victim when he entered the residence, as well as that the knife was the presumable murder weapon. And so I am laying foundation to imply where the murder weapon was originated from.
Objection is overruled. I find that it's relevant, and the counsel is laying a foundation and will further show relevance.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Markowitz, could the knife that murdered Mackenzie Brackman could have possibly come from this drawer?
Yes, it very well could have.
And you stated earlier that you observed a knife block. Would you recognize a photo of the knife block if you saw it?
I would.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 8 be shown to the witness.
That's granted.
Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, I do.
And what is this photograph?
This is a photo of the knife block in the victim's home as it was when I entered the residence.
Is this a true and accurate depiction of the knife block of the victim's home as you entered the residence?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I now ask that Exhibit 8 be admitted into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 will be so admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Markowitz, what do you notice about this knife block?
Well, this knife block is missing one knife, and the slot in the knife block that has the missing knife is the size of the murder weapon.
So could the murder weapon have also come from this knife block as well?
Yes, it could have.
Thank you. Now I'd like to talk about how your investigation proceeded after you visited the residence. Did you know the victim?
Not personally, but I did know of the victim.
And what did you know of him?
The victim was a defense attorney that had worked in a couple cases in the area.
Did you take any actions upon learning that he was a defense attorney?
Yes, I did. I went through his emails and different communications that he had had with other people.
And where did this information that you found in the emails take you to?
Well, he mentioned something called mock trial a lot, so I started investigating that as it seemed to be a major part of his life. And he was also wearing a mock trial shirt when he was murdered, and that's how we got our biggest leads in this investigation.
So where did you take following these leads?
Well, we started interviewing students at the school that he was the coach of the mock trial team at, and he was a coach of those students. And we went to go see if there was any possible connection, although we thought it was unlikely at the time, between the high school mock trial and his murder.
Did you have a prime suspect upon learning the information about the mock trial team at this point in your investigation?
Yes, we did. We learned some evidence that would put Avery Becker in the scene of the crime with motive to commit it.
And did you have a secondary suspect as well?
We initially went through some ideas of secondary suspects, but after we had finished the case, there was no need for one.
And why didn't you pursue these secondary suspects?
Because the case closed. We found our guy.
Thank you. And what did you do after interviewing the students on the mock trial team?
After interviewing the students on the mock trial team, we collected cell phone data from the suspect, Avery Becker.
And what sort of cell phone data records are you talking about?
A file called a CDR, call detail records, which I interpreted.
And how does a CDR work for the jury?
A CDR measures the pings to a cell phone from towers as it moves, gets texts and calls throughout any given day.
And did you create these records yourself?
I did not create the call detail records. However, I interpreted them and created a synopsis of them.
And did you rely upon this data to complete your analysis?
I did.
And so you stated that you created some sort of summarization of this data?
Yes, that is true. I created summarization, synopsis, and an explanation of the data for people not with the training, that do not have the training I do.
Would you recognize a copy of this chart if you saw one?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 15 be shown to the witness.
You may.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us what it is?
This is the summarization of the call detail records that I used with the different pings from Avery Becker's phone on the day of the murder.
Did you create this chart as a part of your regular business at the police department in investigating CDR data?
I did.
And has this chart been kept in the police department as a part of the investigation file?
Yes, it has.
Is this a true and accurate copy of the chart you created in order to summarize this data?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 15 be admitted in evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Exhibit 15 will be so admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And what does the CDR show for the jurors?
Well, the CDR shows the cell phone towers. It's shown by the red radii that connected to Avery Becker's phone and locations important to Avery Becker and the murder.
And as a detective, did you form any conclusions from this data?
Yes, I did.
And what were your conclusions?
I concluded from this data that Avery Becker was at the scene of the crime or around the scene of the crime at the time of the crime.
Objection, speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm not asking the witness to speculate. Under Rule 703, I'm asking him to opine upon his data that he created.
Objection is overruled. Rule 703 does allow opinion testimony by experts, and the court finds that it meets the definition of that rule.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I repeat my question?
You may.
Detective Markowitz, what were your conclusions from this data?
My conclusions were that this data puts Avery Becker in or around the scene of the crime at the time of the crime.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions for this witness.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, may I start?
You may.
Good afternoon, Detective Markowitz.
Good afternoon.
You headed the investigation for this case, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
You were in charge of deciding who to talk to?
Yes.
Deciding of what decisions to make?
Yes, I was.
Of deciding what potential evidence to gather?
Yes.
So let's start at the very beginning. You were called to Coach Brackman's house to investigate his death, correct?
Yes, that is true.
And after a little bit of searching, you found that he was a part of mock trial.
Yes.
So the first place you went to investigate was a high school.
Yes, the mock trial was at the high school.
Yes. Where you only spoke to Alex Fuentes.
Alex Fuentes was the first, and Alex Fuentes did provide us with the information we needed.
So she was the only suspect you spoke to? Or she was the only person you spoke to?
Yes, that is correct. We got the information we needed.
You didn't speak to any other student lawyers on the mock trial team?
No.
Or any other student witnesses?
Nope.
Or anyone else at the school?
Nope, we had the information we needed.
And Ms. Cifuentes told you about Avery Becker's dealings with Mackenzie Brockman.
Yes, that's true.
So this gave you the idea that Avery Becker was a suspect?
This was the first time that Avery Becker was mentioned as suspect.
So you brought Ms. Cifuentes to the station to question her further about Avery Becker.
Yes, that is correct.
And she told you about the supposed text messages she'd received from Mr. Becker,
That is correct.
but she didn't have her phone, did she?
She did not have her phone on her.
So you told her to go home and send you the screenshots when she got there.
Yes.
So you never saw these texts with her in person, did you?
Nope.
Now, I'd like to talk about another part of your investigation. You conducted a cell site data recovery investigation for this case, is that right?
That is correct.
And just a minute ago, you used it to say that Mr. Becker was at Mr. Brockman's house on March 6th.
Yes.
However, you can't actually prove using this data that he entered Mr. Brockman's house
No, I cannot prove the entrance of the house.
or that he even touched his front porch.
Yes, I cannot prove that he went onto the front porch.
You can only prove that Mr. Becker's cell phone sent a signal to a tower that was in the vicinity of Mr. Brockman's house.
Yes, that is correct. With the correct distance and radius and all the information it had a ping at that time.
Okay. But based on that data alone, you have no idea who physically possessed the phone on March 6th when it sent that signal.
Yes, that is correct.
And isn't it true that cell phones don't always connect to the nearest cell phone tower?
Yes, during busy times and in different scenarios, there are rare scenarios where cell phones do not connect to the tower we think they are, so we have other towers that they could have connected to.
That was a yes or no question.
Yes, yes.
So even though you know that a cell phone doesn't always connect to the nearest cell phone tower, you still decided that Avery Becker was the only suspect in this crime.
Well, we investigated Becker and closed the case before other suspects were put in front of me.
Now, Mr. Becker was very clear about his whereabouts on March 6th, looking for his phone with his friend Taylor Perkins.
Yes.
Let's go back a little bit. After investigating the house on the first day, did you go to any of the stores that Taylor Perkins or Avery said they went to?
No, I did not go to any of the stores in the mall.
And did you conduct a cell site data recovery investigation for Taylor Perkins' cell phone to confirm their alibi?
Taylor Perkins was not a suspect, and according to the Fourth Amendment, I cannot search people's property without a warrant.
But you could have gotten that warrant, couldn't you?
Taylor Perkins was not a suspect.
Well,
So-
you could at least bother to check the alibi.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Response?
That's not asked and answered. I'm just simply asking him if he bothered to check the alibi for Taylor Perkins.
Court doesn't find that it was a repetition of a previous question asked, so that objection will be overruled. You may re-ask the question.
Okay. And did you go to the mall that Avery or Taylor said they went to?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
That'll be overruled. I did overrule the objection and allowed the attorney to restate the question.
Okay. You didn't review any surveillance tape at the mall to see if they'd been there
No, I did not.
because you're convinced that the prime suspect of Mr. Brockman's murder was Avery Becker.
Yes, our primary suspect was Avery Becker.
Yes, who was in fact the only person you investigated in connection with this crime.
Yes, the case closed before we had other suspects.
So that's a yes.
Yes, yes, it is.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Prosecution have another witness they'd like to call? Actually, I'm sorry. Is there any redirect that's desired by the prosecution?
No, Your Honor, no redirect.
Thank you. All right, and next witness for the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call Kyle Cusack to the stand.
Thank you. For the purposes of this trial, the court will assume that that witness has been sworn in. You may call your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Cusack. Can you please state and spell your last name for the record?
Kyle Cusack, K-U-Z-A-K.
Thank you. Now I'd like to talk to you about your experience. What is your current occupation?
I'm currently a Colorado Bureau of Investigation Certified Crime Scene Reconstruction Investigator, also known as a CSR.
Thank you. And now, what kind of experience do you have?
I have 19 years of experience working with complex crime scenes.
And now what would this include?
This would include things such as home invasions, burglaries, property crimes, homicides, domestic violence, fatal accidents, and armed robberies.
Thank you. And is there any other experience that you have that is relevant to this case?
For the past 3 years, I have been working with the city of Denver.
And now how do you approach having accurate and efficient CSR work?
I approach this in 5 steps: recognition and documentation, collection of evidence, evaluation of evidence, hypothesis and testing, and reconstruction.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, I would like the court to recognize Kyle Cusack as an expert witness as a reconstruction investigator to provide opinions about this case under Rule 702 and 703.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection and no voir dire, Your Honor.
Thank you. This witness will be admitted as an expert witness in the area of crime scene investigation.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Cusack, did you visit the crime scene?
Yes, I did. I visited the scene of the homicide at 444 South Flower Street just after it was processed by other members of the crime lab.
And now, did you review anything for this case?
Yes, I have reviewed all of the original police reports, as well as the 4 ring security cameras and the photographs taken from the scene.
Did anything guide your work while you were working on this case?
Yes, as with everything, I always let 2 key principles help guide me through my work.
What is the first key principle that you use?
The first key principle is that I assume everything is going to go to trial so I can conduct a thorough and comprehensive investigation accordingly.
And what is the second key principle?
My second key principle is that starting from day 1, I memorialized, documented, and organized all of the evidence. That way I could look at it with a mindset of future reconstruction.
And now what do these principles do for you?
These principles ensure that I can conduct an accurate and efficient flow of my CSR work.
Thank you. Now I'd like to discuss the steps that you took in this case. What was one of the first steps that you did?
One of the first steps that I took was I created a witness tracking spreadsheet to summarize key points of information from different witnesses and suspects.
Were there any other spreadsheets that you used?
Yes. In addition to that, I also created a physical evidence tracking sheet to identify, document, and describe observations made about the evidence, linking evidence ID numbers taken from the scene to department evidence ID numbers and other reference reports.
And would you recognize a copy of the witness tracking sheet if you saw it?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I please have permission to show Exhibit 17 on the screen?
You may.
Thank you. What is this document, Ms. Cusack?
This is a copy of my witness tracking spreadsheet.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of the witness tracking sheet that you created?
Yes.
And is this document something you used throughout your investigation of this case?
Yes.
And do you create charts like this as a regular part of your work as a crime scene investigator?
I do.
And do you keep this as a part of your file?
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I would like for Exhibit 17 be put into evidence.
Any objection?
I would object on the grounds of hearsay, Your Honor.
Response?
Your Honor, according to hearsay rule 803 subsection C, this is a business record that Ms. Cusack used to help with this case.
Your Honor, I would not necessarily call a crime scene investigation a business, and I would not necessarily call this a business record. I believe that this document is still hearsay.
Any further record that the prosecution would like to make?
Yes, Your Honor. This exhibit is not hearsay because I have laid the foundation that established that Ms. Cusack did use this as a regular part of her business, of her business, and that helped her with this case.
The objection will be overruled. I believe the council has laid the proper foundation for the exception 803(6). You may
Yes,
proceed.
Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. With the steps that you have taken, what conclusion did you come up with?
That initially stepping onto the front porch and checking the front door captured by Ring security cameras, the perpetrator then proceeded to the side out of the camera's range.
What else did you conclude?
That the perpetrator, matching the general height and build of the defendant, approached the victim's residence.
And was there anything else that you noticed when you looked at the Ring camera video?
I noticed that the perpetrator had left the range of the Ring security camera, but was captured approximately 10 seconds later by a
Objection,
second
Your Honor.
security camera.
I would ask that if this witness is going to discuss the Ring camera videos, those videos be admitted into evidence.
What's the objection?
I don't have a specific objection, Your Honor. I can attempt to find one.
That objection will be overruled. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Were you able to see the perpetrator leave the residence from the Ring camera videos?
Yes.
And when you saw the video, how was the perpetrator leaving?
They were moving quite quickly. I believe they were running out of the building.
Thank you, Ms. Cusack. Now I'd like to discuss what you observed inside the house. What kind of observations did you find?
I noticed that there were scuff marks on the kitchen floor immediately inside and to the right of the back door, and this would indicate some sort of struggle.
Was there anything else that you noticed?
I noticed that in the kitchen there was a drawer open in which several small knives and other kitchen utensils were present. But more importantly, I noticed that there was a knife block on the counter just a few feet away, and one large knife appeared to be missing.
And after all the observations you saw, what is your conclusion?
I believe that this was a planned burglary gone bad. The perpetrator had full knowledge of the victim's property and residence.
Thank you, Ms. Cusack. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Cusack. I have just a few questions for you. You're a civilian employee, is that correct?
Yes, I am not a police officer. I just work for the police department.
Yes, so you don't have the same training and experience as a police officer.
I am a qualified CSR and I am employed for the police department.
Yes, but you don't have the training and experience of a police officer specifically.
No, a CSR and a police officer are different.
And when you review a scene, Ms. Cusack, you have to wait until after it's been processed by the police in the crime lab. Is that right?
In this case, yes, I did visit the scene after it had been processed.
Thank you, Ms. Cusack. Now, you reviewed Professor Van Owen's conclusion. Is that right? Her investigation.
Yes.
And I think we can agree that yourself and Professor Van Owen came to different conclusions as to what happened at the scene of the crime.
That is correct.
Now, we agreed earlier that you don't have the same experience as a police officer.
Yes, I am a CSR.
And we know that Professor Van Owen spent some time as a police officer. Is that right?
Yes,
And you say in your statement that some of Professor Van Owen's conclusions fall outside of your area of expertise.
that's correct.
Now, Ms. Kuzak, you already said you reviewed the police's investigation, their documents, to help you with this case. Is that right?
Yes,
And in your witness statement, you say that you always assume every case is going to trial, and that's part of how you conduct your work.
yes, it's part of my 2 key principles.
And to the best of your knowledge, Avery Becker, from your review of the police's investigation, Avery Becker was the police's primary suspect. Is that right?
Yes,
Thank you, Ms. Kuzak. I'd like to talk about your reconstruction of the scene. It involves a fight between the intruder and Mr. Brackman, correct?
that's correct.
And one of your supporting pieces of evidence are scuff marks on the floor.
That's correct.
And there are pictures of the scuff marks for this case.
Yes,
And they were taken by the police, not yourself, but the police and the crime tech.
that's correct. I did not take them.
But you did look at them on the day that you went to go investigate this crime scene.
Yes,
Your Honor, I'd ask that our timekeeper can pull up Exhibit 18 so that I may ask the witness some further questions.
That'll be allowed.
Now, Ms. Kuzak, are these the scuff marks that you saw on the day of your investigation?
yes,
And would you say this is a fair and accurate copy of those scuff marks?
yes,
Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 18 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
And I ask that it be constructively published to the jury in whatever virtual way there is.
So ordered.
Now, Ms. Kuzak, scuff marks cannot be carbon dated, can they?
I don't believe so, no.
So you don't know how old these scuff marks are.
No,
And furthermore, these scuff marks, they're by the back door, as we can see in the picture. Is that right?
yes,
And these scuff marks take the shape of parallel lines, do they not?
they appear so in the photo that I'm looking at.
And not as an expert witness, just as a lay witness, I think you'd agree that most people walk with their feet in parallel lines.
I mean, sure.
And the back door is a common place for people to walk in and maybe wipe their feet. Again, not as an expert, just as a lay witness.
Possibly.
And Ms. Kuzak, nowhere in your reports or your witness statement do you mention any other scuff marks in the house.
No, I only mentioned these because there were no other scuff marks found.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzak. Timekeeper, you can put away the scuff marks. Thank you. And now, Ms. Kuzak, you discussed ring videos in your testimony. Is that right?
Yes,
Now, you reviewed these videos carefully as a part of your investigation.
yes, I reviewed them very carefully.
Would you recognize these ring videos if they were shown to you?
Yes,
I would ask Timekeeper to pull up ring videos 10 and 11, exhibits 10 and 11, so that I may show them to the witness. 10 first and then 11.
That's allowed.
So this is exhibit 10. Ms. Kuzak, would you say that this is a fair and accurate copy of the ring videos that you reviewed?
yes,
Thank you. And Your Honor, I move to admit exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Now,
And will be
Timekeeper.
admitted.
Oh, thank you, Your Honor. Timekeeper, if you could move on to exhibit 11. This is another one of the ring videos, Ms. Kuzak. Would you agree again that this is a fair and accurate copy of the ring videos that you viewed?
yes,
Thank you. I move to admit exhibit 11 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. Now, Ms.
Exhibit 11
Kuzak.
be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Kuzak, from these videos, I think we can agree that you can't make out any facial features of the intruder.
that is correct.
And so you can't,
The intruder's wearing a mask.
Yes. So you can't point to any features that are the same on the intruder as the defendant.
Not facial features, but they match the general height and build.
Yes, I apologize, Ms. Kuzak, facial features, no facial features. And Ms. Kuzak, you believe that the knife came from inside of the house and not along with the intruder, is that right?
Yes.
And you can't see anything underneath the intruder's clothing, is that right?
Not from these videos, no.
Now, timekeeper, if you could go back to Exhibit 10 and zoom in on the feet of the intruder. This may take a second. Now, Ms. Kuzak, I think you can agree, looking at these shoes, that these look like slip-on shoes. They don't have laces, do they?
From this particular angle and lighting, I cannot be 100% sure.
They look, to the best of your knowledge, like slip-on shoes. You can't see any specific laces.
I cannot see any specific laces, but that does not mean they are not there.
Now, timekeeper, could you move to Exhibit 11, please? And pause and zoom in on the shoes. Now, Ms. Kuzak, I believe we can both see on these shoes that there are laces. Is that right?
From this particular lighting and angle, yes, I can see laces.
And Ms. Kuzak, nowhere in your witness statement, in your report, did you mention any potential discrepancy in the shoes on the intruder?
I do not believe I mentioned shoes in my statement, no.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzak. You can put the videos away, timekeeper. Thank you. Now, just a few last questions, Ms. Kuzak. You said yourself that you did not have a lot of physical evidence to work off on this case.
Yes, as with all of my cases, the more evidence I can get, the better.
So is it fair to say you made a number of assumptions on this case?
No, I believe that I created a very secure and competent investigation with what I was given.
Okay, Ms. Kuzak. And you weren't at the scene of the crime when it happened, were you?
Not when it happened, no.
You didn't have any fingerprint data?
The intruder was wearing gloves, so DNA such as fingerprints would not be available.
And you had no other DNA data?
No.
You had no license plates?
No.
And there was no video recording from inside the house as the scene was happening?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzak. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution have a witness they would like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call Alex Cifuentes to the stand.
Thank you.
And may I please get a time check? Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Cifuentes. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Alex Cifuentes, Sifuentes.
I would like to start off by asking you a few questions about Colorado High School. Are you a student at Colorado High School?
Yes, I am a senior there.
And what activities are you involved in at Colorado High School?
I am in the mock trial team at Colorado High School.
When did you join the Colorado High School mock trial team?
I joined the team in my freshman year of high school.
And who made you aware of the mock trial team?
Avery Becker is the one who made me aware of the team.
Do you see Avery Becker in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you please describe what they're wearing?
Avery is wearing a brown jacket with a blue shirt.
I asked the record to reflect that the witness has identified Avery Becker.
Subject to cross-examination, the record will so reflect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Did the mock trial club meet to practice?
Yes, it did.
Did you attend those meetings?
Yes, I did attend those meetings.
And did being a member of mock trial take lots of practice and preparation?
Yes, I would say so.
Was Avery Becker in attendance at the mock trial meetings?
Yes, she was.
What did you observe regarding Mr. Becker's participation in mock trial practices?
Objection, Your Honor. This is a leading question.
Response?
I'm asking the witness to detail her observations regarding the defendant's participation at mock trial.
Court will overrule the objection, finding it does not suggest an answer in the question. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I repeat the question?
You may.
What did you observe regarding Mr. Becker's participation in mock trial practices?
I observed that he was always a bit, or she was always a bit more lazy and was often showing up late and never really put in as much work for the team as some of the other people on the team.
Ms. Fuentes, how much work did you put into the mock trial cases?
I'd say I put in a fair amount of work. As soon as we would get new cases and assignments, I would definitely go home and do them right away.
And what kind of a role did Avery Becker play on the team?
Avery played more of like a lazy and unprepared role.
Thank you. And I'd like to discuss the incidents between Avery Becker and Mackenzie Brackman. Did you know Mackenzie Brackman?
Yes, I did. He was our mock trial coach.
Ms. Fuentes, can you please describe the relationship between Mr. Brackman and Avery Becker based on your observations?
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation, as she cannot definitively know the relationship that Avery Becker has with Coach Brackman.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm simply asking the witness to describe the relationship based on her observations. I'm not asking her to define the relationship. I'm asking her to describe what she saw regarding the relationship.
The court will sustain the objection without further foundation. You may ask a few more questions to lay more foundation as to whether this witness has the ability to give the opinion on the relationship.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Fuentes, when you attended mock trial practices, was Avery Becker there?
Yes, she was.
And was Coach Brackman also there?
Yes.
And did you ever see any interactions between Avery Becker and Mr. Brackman?
Yeah, I have seen a few of their interactions.
Can you please describe some of the interactions that you saw?
I have seen one of their interactions, which was when Avery showed up late for probably the bajillionth time, and Mr. Brackman got really upset at her or really upset at Avery, and Avery left really mad that day.
Did anything happen after practice that day?
Yeah, after practice, Avery wrote on Mr. Brackman's really, really nice collectible car.
And what did Avery Becker write on the car?
Avery wrote Worst Coach Award.
What
Your
happened
Honor,
after?
this statement calls for hearsay.
Response?
Since Alex Fuentes was attending the school at the time and she knew what was written on the car, it is not speculation.
The objection is hearsay. What's the response to the hearsay objection?
The response to the hearsay objection is that this goes to the motive and the intent and the actions of the defendant.
Court will overrule the objection and find that it is not, well, the court will sustain the objection until further foundation is laid.
Thank you, Your Honor.
What happened after that day?
After that day, Mr. Brackman kicked Avery off the team for good.
Did Avery Becker have any other friends on the mock trial team to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, Taylor Perkins.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to discuss your interactions over text with Mr. Becker. Did you ever have conversational exchanges over text with Avery Becker following them being removed from the mock trial team?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, may we now show the court Exhibit 14?
You may.
Ms. Fuentes, do you recognize this?
Yes, these are the text messages between Avery and I.
What cell phone did these screenshots come from?
The screenshots came from my phone.
And whose name is at the top of the screen?
Avery's.
Can you please give a brief explanation of how a name gets associated with a specific phone number?
Yeah, so Avery gave me her phone number and I entered it into my phone under her name.
There are text bubbles on the left and there are text bubbles on the right. Which bubbles are from who?
The ones on the left in the white are from Avery, and the ones on the green on the ones on the left in the white are Avery's, and the ones on the right in the green are from me.
Is this a true and accurate copy of the checks exchanged between yourself and Mr. Becker?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I now ask that Exhibit 14 be admitted into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. This piece of evidence calls for hearsay.
Response?
An out-of-court statement isn't hearsay if it isn't being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. This statement is for the defendant, and I'm offering this document for the effect that it had on the witness. This is also a statement of a party opponent, so it is not hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
If, Your Honor, also in this case, Avery Becker has not been clearly identified as the party opponent, as they are not sure if Avery Becker was the one who murdered Coach Brackman. Therefore, he is not the party opponent, as well as their objection to that this is not to prove the truth of the matter asserted. They can admit this evidence as long as they will not use the words on that to depict what they are saying.
With respect to the objection for hearsay, the court will admit it for statements of the party opponent, Mr. Becker. Court finds that a proper foundation has been laid, and its response to the hearsay objection as to Ms. Cifuentes' statements, the court finds that those are relevant as the effect on the listener. So the objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Cifuentes, can you please read the text messages following the spot where Mr. Becker says well?
Well, if he's still upset about his car, then he's going to be really upset when he sees what I do to his house. What are you going to do to his house? I'm going to wait until he's at work and break in and trash it. That'll show him. I don't think that's a very good idea.
Thank you. Now I'd like to talk about what happened after Coach Brackman's murder. Did you receive any communications from anyone involved in the investigation?
Yes, I received a call from a detective.
What did the detective contact you about?
They contacted me about where I was during the time of the murder and if I knew anything about Avery, and I told them about the text messages, and they asked for me to go down to the station for a full interview.
And when you forgot your phone, did you offer to come back with a phone for the detectives?
Yes, I did, but they said that they just needed screenshots and I could just send those to them.
And do you still have that phone?
No, unfortunately, it was really old and I had to get rid of it.
Finally, I'd like to talk about your relationship with Mr. Becker. You stated that you joined the mock trial team because of Mr. Becker. Did you remain friends with Mr. Becker after he was removed from the mock trial team?
Yes, I did.
And lastly, were you and Mr. Becker rivals?
No, we were friends and we were teammates. We were never rivals. I never really wanted to rat Avery out on this, but I can't lie about a situation that it's this big.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cifuentes.
Good afternoon.
You currently go to Colorado High School, right?
Yes, I have previously mentioned that I'm a senior there.
And you were on the mock trial team.
Yes, I was.
And Mackenzie Brackman was the coach of this team.
That's correct.
And Avery Becker was also on this team, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you say you are basically best friends with Avery Becker.
That's true.
In fact, you credit Avery for helping convince you to join mock trial in the first place.
Yes, Avery did do that.
However, in your witness statement, you don't mention hanging out with Avery outside of mock trial, do you?
No, we really both had busy schedules. We couldn't really fit in time to hang out, but we did get Fry Shack together occasionally.
You don't mention going over to Avery's house.
No, like I said, we had busy schedules, but we did go to Fry Shack.
And you also don't mention Avery coming over to your house.
No, we had busy schedules, and honestly, We don't need to like go to each other's houses to be friends. We can hang out at school and talk to each other in the hallways.
But Avery Becker was basically your best friend, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were really good friends.
Now, moving on, Avery and Coach Brackman had their differences, right?
Yes, they did.
And these differences eventually got Avery demoted from A team.
That's true.
But luckily, Avery rejoined the team in time for the regional tournament.
Yeah,
And at that regional tournament, Avery won Best Attorney and the Best Closing awards, right?
that's correct.
But you felt that this was a slap in the face.
That's true, honestly. Avery didn't put in that much work, and I put in a lot of work, and it would be really hard for anybody to see that happen.
Yep, and that Avery won the awards for all of the wrong reasons.
That's true, honestly. Avery really didn't put in much work, and I put in a lot of work.
But Avery Becker was basically your best friend.
That's true, but you can even be mad at your best friend sometimes. Like, honestly, if you're somebody's best friend, it doesn't mean that you think that they do everything right.
Now, Avery eventually got kicked off the team for good, right?
That's correct.
Right, after he wrote Worst Attorney Award on Coach Brackman's car.
Yes.
And after that incident, Avery texted you trying to get back on the team.
That's correct.
And you later had an interview with the police detective regarding these text messages.
Yes, I did.
But you didn't bring your phone with you with the text messages on them to the interview.
No, I did not. I was in a real big rush and I left my phone on the charger. I did offer to come back with my phone and they just stated they needed the screenshots.
So you left your phone on the charger at home.
That's correct.
Did Detective Markowitz ever come to get your phone?
No, they just said that they needed the screenshots and I could just send it to them.
Did they ever ask for a follow-up interview regarding the phone?
No, they just said that the screenshots were all that they needed.
And you later got a new phone, correct?
That's correct, but I did make sure to get all the information that the detectives needed before I did get the new one.
So you, as you said, you sent screenshots with the text messages to the police.
Yeah,
And the police accepted them?
they did. They were the ones who asked me to send it to them.
Now, after that interview, you were contacted by a private investigator.
That's correct.
And this private investigator wanted to interview you as well?
That's correct.
And you refused to meet with this investigator?
Yeah, the way that they were stating the questions honestly felt like they were trying to frame me. And honestly, I didn't want to have to meet with them.
So you didn't conduct an interview?
No.
They never asked you questions?
No.
And you didn't show that investigator the text messages?
I did not. They said that they had information that I was faking them. And honestly, I felt that I honestly wasn't. And I didn't want them to get a hold of information that they could use to frame me.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense have any witnesses that they would like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Avery Becker to the stand.
All right. Reminder that all witnesses have been pre-sworn. You may begin.
Good evening, Mr. Becker.
Good evening.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Avery Becker. Last year, I was a senior at Colorado High School.
What did you like to do as a senior at Colorado High School?
You know, I loved hanging out with my friends. Me and one of my best friends, Taylor, decided to do mock trial together, which I love now too.
Could you tell us about your experience with mock trial?
I loved mock trial and it meant a lot to me. And I loved that I was able to hang out with my friend Taylor too.
Did you have any difficulties with mock trial?
Well, overall, I had a really amazing experience. Sadly, though, I didn't always see eye to eye with our coach, Mr. Brackman, and wish that could have been different.
Other than that, did you like your team?
Yeah, I enjoyed my team. And even Mr. Brackman, despite our differences, he did make the team more competitive. And Taylor was also on the team, and I really enjoyed hanging out with her.
Did anything ever happen with Mr. Brackman?
Well, sadly, tensions were high a lot of the time. And, sometimes we'd get into arguments. Our biggest argument was probably right after regionals.
What happened?
Well, as I said, it was right after regionals, and I thought I had done really well. I had won best attorney as well as best closer, so I was pretty proud of myself. But Mr. Brackman didn't seem very happy with me. He actually seemed pretty angry with me, and he told me I didn't deserve the award and I wasn't going to be any good at state. So I rushed out of practice and I did the stupidest thing I've ever done.
What did you do?
Well, it was a complete accident. I had taken a marker, which I thought was a dry erase marker from the practice. We were using dry erase markers, and I drew in his car.
So did you intend to cause harm to Coach Brackman's car?
No, it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I really messed up. I thought it was a dry erase marker, and he kicked me off the team.
Did you tell anyone about what happened?
Well, afterwards, I talked to my mom, and she told me to do the right thing, which was to apologize. And so I went to his office to try and apologize to him in person, but he wouldn't see me. And so I tried texting him, but he ignored me.
Thank you, Avery. I'd like to talk about the night before Mr. Brackman was murdered. That was March 5th. Do you remember what you were doing that night?
That night, I was hanging with my friend Taylor. We had gone to the Fry Shack, and Fry Shack's this amazing little place where all the CHS kids, Colorado high school kids, go to hang out. And I was playing on my phone, and I got distracted by the mock trial team that was there.
How about the next day? What did you do?
Well, I must have left my phone somewhere the day before, so me and Taylor skipped school to go look for it. We spent all day retracing my steps and calling my phone, but we never found it.
So when did you hear about what happened to Mr. Brackman?
Well, I heard that something had happened to him at the end of the day. We were retracing our steps, and we ended up back at the Fry Shack. And we heard from the mock trial kids that were there that Coach had never shown up to practice for some reason.
Thank you, Avery. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the allegations against you. Have you heard Ms. Cifuentes testify that you sent text messages about planning to break into Mr. Brackman's house?
Yes.
And you saw a copy of these text messages earlier in trial?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading questions.
The court will overrule that objection. I believe that the witness is trying to lay a foundation, and leading questions are permitted as. So you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, permission to bring up previously admitted Exhibit 14.
You may.
Do you recognize these texts?
No, I've never seen those texts before today, ever. I definitely didn't send those texts. Me and Avery weren't really that close.
And how would you describe your relationship with Alex Cifuentes?
Well, me and Alex weren't actually friends. We just really knew each other through mock trial. We were just kind of being polite to one another.
And early in the trial, did you see the ring videos?
Yes.
Was that you in the ring videos?
No, I mean, of course it wasn't me. There are so many people that look exactly like that, and I would never do anything like this. I didn't want to hurt Mr. Brackman. I wanted to get back on the team. I wanted to apologize.
Did you enter Mr. Brackman's house on March 6th?
No, of course not. I didn't want to hurt Mr. Brackman, and I didn't even know where he lived.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Becker.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start off by talking about your time on the mock trial team. Previously, you stated that you were a member of the Colorado High School mock trial team.
Yes.
And your style as a lawyer was that you preferred to make up statements on the fly as opposed to preparing them.
Yes.
And you and Coach Brackman didn't get along because of this.
Not really.
And you even stated in direct that tensions between you and Coach Brackman were high.
Some of the time, yeah.
So much so that you would argue at almost every single practice.
We argued some of the time, yeah.
And Coach Brackman even called you lazy.
Yeah.
He called you disruptive.
Yeah.
And you stated that your best friend on the team was Taylor Perkins. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Taylor Perkins is testifying before us today as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you used to text each other during practice.
Objection.
The objection is relevance. Response?
Your Honor, this question goes directly to the motive, bias, and interest of the defendant.
Do you have text messages from that Avery Becker sent to Taylor Perkins?
Just a minute. That's what's the basis of the objection?
Of my objection?
Yes.
I said relevancy.
And so the relevancy is it goes bias and motive. Can you elaborate further, counsels? How did that, the questioning is related to the bias and motive?
Yes, Your Honor, this goes directly to the defendant's motive and bias as it talks about how he felt about the mock trial team, what he did while he was during his time on the mock trial team, as well as his relationship with fellow witness Taylor Perkins.
The objection will be overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Becker, you were even caught not paying attention during practice.
Yeah, sometimes.
And because of all of this, you were bumped down to the B team.
Yeah.
As a senior.
Yeah.
And this made you angry, didn't it?
Yeah.
You even said that the B team was full of losers.
Yes.
And after this, your friend Taylor Perkins also quit the mock trial team.
Yeah, she wanted to help me out.
And she wanted to help you out by getting you back on the team.
Yeah.
And because of this, your team succeeded in winning the regional competition. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you claim that this is because of you?
Well, I mean, our coach did put in effort. I mean, he did make the team more competitive, so you have to give him some credit for that.
But you claim that this is because of you, Mr. Becker. Because you won the best attorney.
I did win the best attorney award, yes.
And your coach, Brackman, regardless of how he worked to pull the team together, he didn't congratulate you after winning this award. Is that correct?
No.
And this made you really angry.
I was upset at the time, yeah.
Even though Brackman didn't specifically congratulate anyone else?
No, he did not.
And then you stormed out of practice.
Yes.
And you called him the worst coach in the state.
Yes.
And you stated in direct that you had a dry erase marker that you were using during your practice after regionals.
Yes, I thought it was a dry erase marker.
You thought it was a dry erase marker because you were using it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you took that marker out when you stormed out, didn't you?
Yeah.
And it ended up being a permanent marker?
It did. It was very surprising.
It was
a
a
complete
permanent marker,
accident.
even though you had stated that you had used it during the practice.
We had been using dry erase markers during the practice, so I had assumed that it was a dry erase marker.
And you wrote in giant letters across Mr. Brackman's car, "Worst Attorney Award."
It was the dumbest thing I've ever done.
And at the time, you had the intention to write on the car.
I thought it was just going to be a completely harmless prank.
Is that a yes,
but
Mr. Becker? At the time of you writing on the car, you had the intention to write on a car.
yeah,
And regardless of how much you regret your actions, regardless if it was the stupidest thing you said that you had ever done, your regret cannot undo the crime that you already committed.
yeah,
You let your emotions get the best of you and you committed a crime.
yeah.
And afterward, you went home and cried, didn't you?
Yeah, I felt horrible of
And you
everything.
told your mother that you would get back at him if it was the last thing that you ever did.
At that moment, I was very angry, but
Is that a
the
yes,
moment
Mr.
passed.
Becker? Did you say that?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions for this witness.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense would like to call another witness. They may do so.
Your Honor, the defense calls Taylor Perkins to the stand.
Thank you. Perkins has been previously sworn to tell the truth. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Perkins. I would like to start with a few questions so that the jury can get a good understanding of who you are.
Good afternoon.
Can you please tell the jury about yourself?
Yes, I'm Taylor Perkins. I'm currently a freshman at CU Boulder, but last year I attended Colorado High School.
Did you participate in any activities in high school?
I did actually. One of the activities I was a part of was mock trial. And I was actually a part because of Avery. He was my best friend. He convinced me to do it.
And who is the coach of this team?
It was Coach Brackman.
How was your experience on the mock trial team?
Well, initially it was great. I mean, me and Avery were really good on the team and it was fun. But after a while, it started getting there was more tension.
Well, what happened?
Well, Avery and Coach Brackman didn't always see eye to eye. Often they would argue.
And what eventually happened regarding the relationship between Avery and Coach Brackman?
Well, after that, it just got worse. I mean, there was one practice, it was about a month before regionals, when they had a huge argument because Avery had showed up and he wasn't the most prepared he's been. He was making things up on the fly. I mean, despite that, I think he performed pretty flawlessly. But of course, Coach Brackman seemed to get really upset and he demoted him to B team.
And how did Avery react to this demotion?
I mean, clearly he was really upset. It was his senior year. He had been putting in the work for 4 years, and then he had just been suddenly demoted a month before regionals.
And what were your thoughts on his demotion?
I mean, I didn't think it made sense. Without Avery, I said that I didn't think we'd be able to win regionals. So I decided to step down from A team. I mean, mock trial didn't really mean that much to me compared to Avery. And the only reason I had really done it was to be with my friend. So I didn't want to be a part of it if he wasn't going to be on the team.
Yes. What were the effects of these two changes on the composition of the mock trial A team?
Well, after I stepped down a week before regionals, Coach Brackman didn't really have another choice but to let Avery back on A team.
And what did that mean for the team?
Well, I think it proved to me that it was a great choice on my behalf. I mean, Avery won awards at regionals.
Yes. And how did that affect Avery's dealings with Coach Brackman?
Well, it wasn't what you'd expect. You'd expect him to congratulate him, but after that, after regionals, there was a practice when Coach Brackman basically went off on Avery, telling him that he didn't deserve all his awards despite all the work he had put in. It was
And
pretty mean.
yeah, how did Avery respond to this criticism?
I mean, Avery was reasonably upset. He had worked so hard and he was proud of himself. So on the way out, he grabs what he told me later he thought was a dry erase marker and he wrote on Coach Brackman's car.
What happened next?
Well, after that, Coach Brackman kicked Avery off the team.
And what did Avery do after getting kicked off the team?
Avery was really upset. He tried texting everybody on the team to see if they'd help him get back on the team. He even tried to go to practice and he wanted to apologize to Coach Brackman, but he was asked to leave.
What happened after Avery was asked to leave?
Well, it was on Thursday, and that day he came to my house and we played some games. And then after that, we went to have dinner at the Fry Shack.
And what was the dynamic like at the Fry Shack?
Well, at first it was good, but it ended up not being the best choice because the mock trial team showed up. And I mean, it made him upset. Everybody tried to show their support, even Alex Cifuentes, but it seems pretty insincere.
Yes. Did you observe Avery having any particular history with Alex Cifuentes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the surface, Avery and Alex were fine, but deep down, there was some tension because Alex always wanted all the roles that Avery had. Alex wanted the spotlight that Avery had.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, this is not speculation, as this is my witness's rationally based perception of her friend's dealings.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Perkins, back to the Fry Shack. What happened next?
Well, when Alex came over to talk to Avery, Avery got really upset and he stormed off to the bathroom, leaving his phone on the table. And so I stayed there talking to Alex while Avery was in the bathroom.
When did you realize that Avery lost his phone?
We realized the next day he came to pick me up for school and I asked him about it, and that's when we realized it was missing. And so I suggested that we should go look for it.
Did you eventually find his phone?
No, we didn't. We retraced our steps. We went to the mall where we went after we had gone to the Fry Shack the night before for dinner. We went to the Fry Shack, but we didn't find it anywhere. I was texting it, calling it. We weren't able to find it.
How long did you search?
We searched all day.
And was Avery with you the entire time?
Yes, he was.
So please describe to me your interview with the police to discuss Mr. Brackman's death.
I didn't have an interview.
How many times did they call you to set up an interview?
They never called me.
And how many times did they email you to set up an interview?
They also didn't do that.
How many times did they text you to set up an interview?
They didn't text me. They didn't communicate with me at all.
So, to the best of your knowledge, did they learn about your activities to track down Avery's lost phone?
I don't know how they would have been able to without contacting me.
Again, to the best of your knowledge, did they learn that you'd spent this time with Avery on the day that Coach Brackman died?
No, they didn't. I never met with them.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
May I begin, Your Honor?
You may.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Perkins.
Good afternoon.
You did mock trial in your final year of high school, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And you did it with Avery Becker.
Yes, I did.
And you would consider Mr. Becker to be your best friend, correct?
Yes, at the time he was.
And you think that Mr. Becker was the best lawyer on the entire team, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't shabby myself either, but he was definitely the best.
And you said if it wasn't for Mr. Becker, you wouldn't have done mock trial.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really like as much as he did, and I really just did it because he convinced me to.
And now your coach was Mackenzie Brackman.
Yes, that's true.
And you spent a lot of time during mock trial observing the relationship between Coach Brackman and Avery Becker, correct?
Sure, I mean, like any other teammate, I would notice when they argued.
And Mr. Brackman was always giving Mr. Becker a hard time about something.
Yeah, he was.
And now, is it true that you thought that Mr. Brackman was a mediocre coach?
Yeah, I don't think he always made the best choices for our team.
And you thought he was an even more mediocre lawyer?
Yes, I think that could have been true.
Thank you. I'd like to discuss what happened on March 5th. You and Mr. Becker went to the Fry Shack, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And you saw the mock trial team there.
Yes.
And according to your statement, everybody was telling Mr. Becker how unfair it was that Coach Brackman kicked him off the team, correct?
Yeah.
Even Alex Cifuentes.
Yes, even Alex Cifuentes. It was a bit surprising.
But Avery Becker got so upset and stormed off to the bathroom, correct?
Yeah, he was. I mean, it reminded him that he wasn't on the team, so he stormed off to the bathroom, leaving his phone behind on the table.
Thank you. And now you say that Mr. Becker's phone was like a third kidney.
Yeah, it was.
And it was never out of reach.
Yes, that's true.
And it was very unusual for him to leave it anywhere, correct?
Yeah, for sure. I think that just goes to show how upset he was.
Now I would like to discuss what happened on March 6th. Avery was not answering your messages on the morning of March 6th, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And when Avery picked you up that morning, both of you realized that his phone was missing.
Yes, we did.
And even though it was like a third kidney, and normally he wouldn't have left it anywhere, correct?
Yes.
So you came up with the idea to ditch school to go look for Avery Becker's phone, correct?
Yes, I told him that we should look for it.
And you say that you think that Alex Cifuentes must have taken the phone?
I'm not sure. I mean, the last time I remember seeing it was when he stormed off to the bathroom. After that, I don't know what happened to it.
But you think that Alex Cifuentes took your phone? Took Avery Becker's phone?
I mean, I think it could have been a possibility. I was talking to Alex by the table where he left his phone.
Thank you. Lastly, I would like to discuss your relationship with Avery Becker. You were in mock trial for 4 years, correct?
Yes, I was.
And that was a lot of work for you over the years.
I mean, it was an activity I chose to be involved in.
But it was a lot of work for you.
What do you mean? Like if it was difficult or just a lot to do?
You had to put in a lot of effort.
Sure, yeah, like any activity.
And Avery was on the team, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And he was demoted from the A team.
Yes, he was.
And Avery wanted to get back on the A team.
Yes.
So you sacrificed your position to help Avery Becker, correct?
I'm not sure I'd call it a sacrifice. I mean, I didn't really like mock trial that much, and it wasn't that important to me.
But you ultimately gave up your position.
I did step down.
And you did this to support your best friend, correct?
Yeah, I mean, he was my best friend, and I knew how much it meant to him, but I also don't think we would have been able to win regionals without him.
And now you are here today in court to help support your best friend, Avery Becker, correct?
I'm just here to tell my story. I'm just here to say what happened on that day.
Objection, Your Honor. Rule 403. This question will mislead the jury as the probative value much outweighs the other possibilities.
What's the response?
Your Honor, I was simply asking for her. I was asking for her probable value is not outweighed, and that's why I was asking that question.
The court will overrule the objection, finding it's a relevant line of questioning to matters of dispute, particularly the relationship between the witness and the defendant. So you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to repeat my question?
Yes, please do.
And you are here today in court to help support your best friend, Avery Becker, correct?
I am just here to tell my story and to say what happened that day.
But you're also here to support Avery Becker, no matter the outcome.
I am here as a witness.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, this witness may be excused.
Thank you. So, defense wish to call any other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Professor Blake Van Owen to the stand.
Thank you. This witness has been previously sworn in. You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Professor Van Owen. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, good evening. My name is Professor Blake Van Owen, and I teach and study criminal justice.
And how did you find yourself working in this area of criminal justice?
Yes, I've always sort of felt drawn towards criminal justice. I've always wanted to make a positive impact into my community, so I became a police officer. But I left the force after about 9 months because I realized that there were numerous practices with which I disagreed. So I guess I left to pursue a career that felt like I was actually helping people.
And what sort of things did you pursue to this end?
Yes, well, I worked a few jobs after this. I first worked as a school resource officer. I worked in private security, but I also began teaching classes on police practices.
That's wonderful, Professor Van Owen. And have you continued teaching? Have you done anything else since then? What has your life looked like?
Yes, well, I have continued to teach, but I've also gone back to school and I've received my master's in criminal justice. And I've also began work as a private investigator, where in trials such as these, I'll testify as an expert.
And what areas have you testified in before?
Yes, I've testified regularly in crime scene reconstruction, cell tower data analysis, and general police practices.
And when you say regularly, about how many times have you testified in these areas?
Yes, well, I've testified as an expert more than 5 times in all of these areas, and I've been admitted as an expert in multiple states. I think Colorado, Kansas, Wyoming, Arizona, Nebraska, and New Mexico.
Thank you, Professor. Your Honor, at this time, I move to admit Professor Van Owen as an expert in 3 areas: crime scene reconstruction, cell site analysis, and general police practices.
Any objection? Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor will be so admitted as an expert in those areas.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Professor Van Owen, I'd like to start just broad. What is the biggest takeaway you have from your time spent looking at the investigation done on this case?
Yes, I think that this investigation was rushed, that it was filled with mistakes, and that the police chose their suspect before they even actually started investigating it.
What do you mean by that last statement?
Yes, well, for starters, the first place that the police looked into was the high school mock trial team, where they heard from one student, Alex Cifuentes, about Avery Becker. In fact, I don't believe that Detective Markowitz ever interviewed anybody else. And so they essentially conducted this investigation with only Mr. Becker in mind, seeing as they didn't investigate any other witness or suspects.
Thank you, Professor. And what other parts of Detective Markowitz's investigation led you to these conclusions about the investigation being rushed and filled with mistakes?
You've already heard from the prosecution about these text messages that supposedly show Mr. Becker's intent to break into Mr. Brackman's home. However, I believe that you were misled as to the legitimacy of these text messages.
And what is your opinion on the legitimacy of these text messages?
Yes, well, these text messages were actually screenshots sent to the police by Alex Cifuentes. The police could have easily checked to see if these were real, actual text message conversation that actually happened. They have this special software called Celebrite, which takes all the data off of a phone so they can look at it to see if these text messages were real. But Detective Markowitz chose not to use this.
Thank you, Professor. Before I move on, was there any other part of Detective Markowitz's general investigation that you thought wasn't well performed?
Yes, as a part of their investigation, the police, as is standard in any crime scene investigation, took photos of the crime scene. But there were a few photos, in particular the ones of the blood spatter, that went missing. The files were corrupted. In any other case, I might say that this is something more dubious, but here I think it's just another example of incompetence, because what competent police department doesn't back up their crime scene photos?
Thank you, Professor. Now, I'd like to move on to another part of the police's investigation, the cell site investigation. Would you tell us your thoughts on this part of Detective Markowitz's investigation?
Yeah. Again, you were presented with cell site data, but again, I believe you were misled as to how cell towers actually work. See, the prosecution looked at the cell site data and said, if Mr. Becker's phone connected to these towers, then obviously it was there and Mr. Becker was there along with it. But that's simply not how cell towers work.
Thank you, Professor. Your Honor, before I continue, I request that the timekeeper could pull up the previously admitted Exhibit 15 so that the jury may have reference for what Professor Van Owen is about to describe.
So allowed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Professor, when you said that that's just simply not how cell towers work, would you describe how they do work and why this information might be misleading?
Well, you could be standing right next to a cell tower and still connect 1 mile away. It really depends on the traffic of that tower, because your phone isn't designed to connect you to the closest tower, but instead to the tower that will get you the best signal. So just because Mr. Becker's phone pinged off of these towers doesn't necessarily mean that his phone was there, and it certainly doesn't mean that Mr. Becker was there.
What do you mean by it? It certainly doesn't mean that Mr. Becker was there.
Well, you've already heard from both Ms. Taylor Perkins and Mr. Becker that Mr. Becker had lost his phone and that they were looking for it, and anybody could have had it. And this route that the phone supposedly traveled on is a major route filled with multiple major streets whose sole purpose isn't to get to Mr. Brackman's home.
Thank you, Professor. Just before I move on, was there anything else that struck you as poorly executed about this cell site investigation?
Yes, Detective Markowitz could have attempted to verify Mr. Becker's alibi by pulling the cell site data records from Ms. Perkins' phone, but he chose not to. He didn't. In fact, the only person whose data he pulled was Mr. Becker's.
Thank you, Professor. Timekeeper, we are good and done with Exhibit 15. Thank you. Now, Professor Van Owen, I'd like to discuss the other part of the prosecution's case, the crime scene reconstruction done by Kyle Cusack. What are your thoughts on this part of the prosecution's case?
Well, in their investigation, Cusack came to a lot of unsupported assumptions. For example, Cusack opines that the scuff marks found on the kitchen floor are somehow indications of a struggle, but there's no way to prove that. Again, their story hinges on Mr. Brackman having both heard the Ring doorbell notifications and having grabbed a knife in self-defense. But again, there's no way to prove this.
Now, Professor, I think we both know, as you've had experience in CSR data, that sometimes CSRs have to make assumptions. Why is it that these assumptions particularly were so troubling to you?
The assumptions that were made by Ms. Cusack didn't fit much with any of the physical evidence found at the scene, but instead seemed to match remarkably well with what Detective Markowitz believed to have happened at the scene. And I'm just troubled by how this crime scene reconstruction wasn't completed solely off of the evidence, but seemingly to align with the prosecution's version of events.
Thank you, Professor. Just briefly, I know you sort of completed your own reconstruction of this scene. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that?
I actually don't think that my reconstruction is all that important to this right now, because it doesn't matter the exact way in which Mr. Brackman died, because it's my opinion that Mr. Becker wasn't even at the scene of the crime at all. And I think the key thing to focus on here is that Ms. Cusack's investigation was filled with unsupported assumptions. So there's no certainty that their conclusions actually led to Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Professor. Now, on the subject of your conclusions, you mentioned earlier that Detective Markowitz never investigated any suspect other than Avery Becker. Did you investigate other suspects where they did not?
I can't point to anybody with 100% certainty, but I'm sure there were multiple other people that were worth looking into.
And what kind of people would those be?
Well, as a defense attorney, It's likely that Brackman had many disgruntled clients or families of clients, and in particular, a student named Blair Rollins, who in fact went to the same high school as Mr. Becker.
Would you tell us about Blair Rollins?
Yes. Brackman worked as an attorney for Blair Rollins' father, who was ended up convicted by the jury. I believe he got committed to life in prison. And I can't tell you if Blair Rollins committed this crime, but there's just as much cause, if not more so, to look into Blair Rollins, yet the police never even considered them an option.
Thank you, Professor. Just one final question, if I may. Very simply, do you think that Avery Becker committed this crime?
Absolutely not. I can't tell you who did commit this crime, but what I can tell you is that the only physical evidence that the police were able to find that could possibly point to Becker was misleading cell site data from a phone that Mr. Becker didn't even have that day, and unauthenticated, highly questionable screenshots of a text message conversation we can't be sure actually ever happened. So no, I don't believe that Mr. Becker committed this crime.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Does the defense have any other witnesses to call?
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Oh, cross-examination. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Professor Van Owen.
Good afternoon.
We're talking about your profession. Is it true that you were a former member of the Aurora Police Department?
Yes, I was for about 9 months.
And is it true that you chose to leave the Aurora Police Department?
Yes, I did. I realized that there were multiple practices with which I just couldn't be a part of.
And you are currently a private investigator and a professor?
Yes, yes, I am.
And you have testified in court as a witness before?
Yes, I have multiple times.
But only ever for the defense?
I understand what you mean, but the prosecution only ever really uses their own in-house experts. So yes, only really as a defense.
I'd like to talk about your involvement in this case. You have reviewed the police reports filed by Detective Markowitz?
Yes, I have.
And you've also reviewed the police photographs?
Yes. Well, the ones that were available.
And the cell tower records?
Yes, I did.
And the crime scene report filed by Kyle Cusack?
Yes, I did.
And along with that, you've also conducted your own investigation on aspects of this case?
Yes, I did. I reviewed both the police's investigation and Cusack's investigation.
And part of your own investigation involved the murder weapon?
Yes, I do mention the murder weapon in my investigation.
May Exhibit 6 be displayed on the screen?
Yes.
I'm sorry, my dogs are upstairs running around. It's very loud.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And is this a true and accurate depiction of the murder weapon?
From what I know, yes.
Your Honor, I ask that this Exhibit 6 be admitted into evidence.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I would object to 703 or 704 relevance, not 704, I'm so sorry, 403 relevance, and 602 lack of foundation.
Response?
This has been established to be the murder weapon by the police officers involved in this investigation, and it is relevant to this case because it is the murder weapon in this case. And for the foundation, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to respond if I may, but you feel free to finish first.
I'll allow counsel to finish their response.
And for the foundation, we've established that Professor Blake Van Owen is a private investigator and a professor and is an expert witness. So.
And counsel, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. While Professor Van Owen did look at these pictures as a part of their investigation, they never saw this knife in person. And as has been pointed out, they weren't ever at the crime scene to see this knife. I don't believe they have specific qualifications and foundation to testify to this exhibit.
Court will overrule the objection. It is a weapon that has been identified as the weapon used for the murder of the victim, and the court finds that proper foundation has been laid.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I proceed?
Thank you, Your Honor. So this is the murder weapon.
From what I know, yes.
Your Honor, may previously admitted Exhibit 8 be displayed on the screen?
Yes.
The knife determined to be the murder weapon does not match the knives in this block.
No, no, not at all.
And you believe that Kyle Kuzak's simplistic suggestion that the knife belonged to Brackman showcases that he was assuming something about this case?
Not. Yes. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. And you believe that Kyle Kuzak's simplistic suggestion that the knife belonged to Brackman showcases that he was assuming something about this case?
Oh, of course. There's no way to know whether or not Mr. Brackman owned this knife.
And you also believe that it is Investigations 101 not to assume anything?
Yes.
And you believe that because the knife determined to be the murder weapon did not match the style of knives in the block found at the crime scene, that the intruder could have arrived onto the scene with the knife?
Yes, it is an entirely likely scenario in which the intruder brought the knife with them to the home.
Your Honor, may previously admitted Exhibit 8 be shown on the screen?
Yes.
Sorry, excuse me, Exhibit 7.
Yes.
There are many different kinds of knives in this drawer.
Yes, if that's a question.
So Mackenzie Brackman owned a plethora of knives?
It appears so, but correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that Kuzak claims that this knife came from that knife block.
And when the knife drawer was open when the police arrived on the scene?
Sure, yes.
And there is no evidence that any other drawer was open?
No.
And you still assume that the intruder likely brought the knife onto the scene with them?
It's just as likely assumption of the intruder having brought the knife to the home than Mr. Brackman having grabbed the knife himself.
I'd like to discuss your payment in this case. You are a paid investigator?
Well, yes, I work as a private investigator. It's part of what I do for a living.
And you get paid $225 per hour of research?
Yes, I believe that's what it is.
And $450 per hour of deposition and court testimony?
Yes.
And you've stated that you've charged the defendant $7,000 to date?
Yes, and that's about the usual amount I charge in an investigation like this.
And you've stated that you tend to only get what you pay for in this business?
Can you explain what you're referring to?
In your witness statement, you've stated
yes, but
what you paid for in this business?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, my camera didn't turn on. Yes.
Did defense have any other witnesses they'd like to call?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Plaintiff wish to make closing argument, or prosecution rather, wish to make closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing and co-counsel, ladies and gentlemen of our jury. Wrath, revenge, and repercussions. Ms. Admire introduced these three words to you in her opening statement today, and the evidence showed why they were part of the murder of Mackenzie Brackman. Mr. Brackman's attempt to discipline Avery Becker triggered the defendant's wrath. The defendant then sought revenge. To break in and trash someone's house is burglary. This was a burglary gone terribly wrong. As a result, Mr. Brackman suffered the ultimate repercussions. The prosecution has carried its burden to prove the charges against Avery Becker. Second-degree burglary of a dwelling requires that Avery Becker knowingly entered unlawfully into a dwelling with the intent to commit the crime. Jury instruction number 9 defines criminal mischief as knowingly damaging real or personal property of another person. The evidence is clear that Avery Becker intended criminal mischief. You saw the text. The idea that teenager Alex Cifuentes falsified the text is the defense grasping at straws. Avery Becker was livid for being kicked off the mock trial team. and Coach Brackman could feel his wrath. And this was not the first time the defendant damaged Mr. Brackman's property out of anger. Remember the permanent marker on the car. Members of the jury, a burglary gone wrong can lead to murder in the first degree. Jury instruction number 7 explains that. If you find that Mackenzie Brackman died in the course of a second-degree burglary, then whoever was involved in that burglary committed first-degree murder. In this case, that person was Avery Becker. There is no question that Mackenzie Brackman died from a stab wound with a kitchen knife in his home. We have also proven to you that Mackenzie Brackman died during the course of a burglary. The Ring video that makes clear that an uninvited individual entered the home and then ran away. Kyle Kuzak carefully reviewed and analyzed the evidence and provided you with a careful and credible reconstruction of the events of March 6, 2020. There was a scuffle, a broken dish, and the text. This man was stabbed when things went wrong with Avery Becker's plan to trash that house. His plan for revenge. Detective Markowitz has clearly explained the significance of the cell phone data. Ladies and gentlemen, Avery Becker was there. And how does the defense explain away this evidence? They present the defendant and the defendant's biased best friend. They tell you that Avery Becker, who was never without the phone, somehow and for some reason was without the phone on the one day that the phone is traced to a murder scene. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have to prove that Avery Becker had the intent to murder Coach Brackman. Our burden is to prove that he died during that burglary. The evidence is clear. It establishes that Avery Becker is guilty of first-degree murder. This was a plan of revenge. Things got out of control. Avery's emotions got out of control. And then Coach Brackman was dead. Dead before he even hit the floor. Imagine Avery Becker's panic. In a plan to avoid the repercussions of what happened, Avery Becker used his best friend. Taylor Perkins would do anything to help out a friend in need. Taylor Perkins has showed you that she would help Avery Becker, and Avery Becker most certainly needed help. Consider their expert, Blake Van Owen. She was not at the scene. Blake Van Owen did not collect the evidence. All she did was criticize the work of an experienced detective, Jordan Markowitz, and professional crime scene reconstructionist, Kyle Kuzak. Van Owen's Monday morning quarterbacking could not change the compelling evidence in this case. Avery Becker was motivated by wrath, intended to get revenge, and Mr. Brackman suffered the ultimate repercussions during that burglary. Now it is time for the defendant to experience the rightful, legal repercussions through your verdict. Avery Becker is guilty of second-degree burglary of a dwelling and murder in the first degree. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense closing?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Rushed, reckless, guilty until proven innocent. Members of the jury, in his frantic stampede to condemn a suspect, Detective Markowitz's investigation became rushed, reckless, and filled with mistakes. The police decided Avery Becker was guilty until proven innocent, and not the other way around. They only ever had one suspect, only ever interviewed one person, relied on faulty cell site data and faulty text messages, and yet are determined to convict a high school boy. Members of the jury, today we've shown you that the prosecution's story is little more than holes, mistakes, and assumptions strung together by pieces of broken narrative. Now, the prosecution has the burden of proof today. They must prove to you beyond any reasonable doubt, pursuant to jury instructions 7, 8, and 9, that Avery Becker, on March 6th of 2020, committed second-degree burglary by knowingly entering 444 South Flowers Street with the intent to commit criminal mischief, and in doing so, killed Mackenzie Brackman. Now, as jury instruction number 2 tells you, if you find that any of these elements have not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find Avery Becker not guilty. Now, members of the jury, I'd like you to notice that all of the elements that the prosecution must prove are contingent upon one thing: that Avery Becker was in fact at 444 South Flower Street on March 6th of 2020. And the prosecution attempted to use cell site data to prove this to you. But all they really showed was a police force desperate to make an arrest, jumping to conclusions. Professor Van Owen told you how cell site analysis cannot definitively prove the location of a phone. And more importantly, you heard from both Avery and Taylor that Avery was not in possession of his phone on March 6th. He was looking for it. He had lost it the night before. Anyone could have had Avery's phone. Anyone could have used it. And yet the prosecution wants you to believe, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Avery and his phone were at the scene of the crime. And this is key. This is key, members of the jury, because if you cannot be sure that Avery Becker was at the scene of the crime, you cannot find Avery Becker guilty. But why stop there? The prosecution tried to show you that Avery had motive to break into Mr. Brackman's home pursuant to jury instruction number 8. They showed you text messages supposedly sent from Avery Becker to Alex Cifuentes. But members of the jury, Professor Van Owen made you aware that these text messages were in fact screenshots that Detective Markowitz never attempted to verify despite having the equipment to do so. And you heard from Taylor Perkins that Avery and Alex's relationship was testy, filled with tension. Yet Detective Markowitz never even considered the idea of faked text messages. And on the list goes. Detective Markowitz never talked to anyone other than Alex Cifuentes. Detective Markowitz never pulled the cell site data from anyone other than Avery Becker. Detective Markowitz didn't back up the photos of the crime scene. Detective Markowitz never visited the places that Avery and Taylor testified to going to on March 6th. Detective Markowitz never looked into any other subjects. Detective Markowitz never looked into Blair Rollins. And the prosecution, they would have you believe, as they just said, that Avery Becker had the wrath and the desire for revenge strong enough to kill a man. I'd like to remind you that Avery Becker was removed from a mock trial team, while Blair Rollins watched her father sentenced to prison. Yet Detective Markowitz never thought to look into Blair Rollins. Now, members of the jury, the prosecution brought before you Kyle Kuzak in one last attempt to prove that Avery Becker committed this felony murder. But Ms. Kuzak's reconstruction sports as many assumptions as the investigation does mistakes. Ms. Kuzak assumed that the Ring doorbell, that Mr. Brackman heard the Ring doorbell. She assumed that the scuff marks were indications of a struggle. She assumed that the knife came from inside the house. And while all of these assumptions none of these assumptions point to Avery Becker definitively. Assumptions are not a basis for conviction. So, members of the jury, I ask you to think about Avery and Taylor's testimony. Unlike with the prosecution's story, you won't have to stretch your mind or fill in gaps to believe them. Avery just wants to make it from high school to college, and yet the prosecution is putting his whole world on trial, and they clearly want a conviction regardless of the faulty and lacking evidence. Don't let the prosecution make Avery Becker guilty until proven innocent. Don't let the prosecution make Avery Becker the victim. Find Avery Becker not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the trial. People want to turn on their video. Congratulations, everybody. It was great. I am Magistrate Wheeler. Do the scoring panelists need time to work on their scores, or? Yes, a little bit of time to, okay.
I didn't actually get a rosters. The score
Okay.
sheet's asking for names, and I don't know where to find those. I mean, I guess I could just look at the.
I looked at
Is
the
it
list, but you kind of had to piecemeal it together.
If you can't fill in the names, it's not the end of the world. We have the rosters as well. So don't stress about that.
Okay, perfect.
Well, I was very impressed by your work, and just want to introduce myself, and then I'll let the scoring panelists introduce themselves. I'm a magistrate in the 17th Judicial District. We're in my courtroom. You may have noticed the lights went out. It's motion detecting, and I'm sorry about if that was distracting to you. You might ask what a magistrate is versus a judge. The difference is I can do certain things and I can't do certain things. I can't preside over jury trials, but I can take certain pleas to misdemeanors. I'm not appointed by the governor. I'm hired by the presiding judge. Before being a magistrate, I was a municipal court judge for several cities and municipalities. And before that, I was a public defender and a private defense attorney. I've also coached high school and college mock trial, and I know how much work goes into what you all have done, and I'm really impressed by your performance. And I want to thank you for putting in all the hard work. I'm happy to give my feedback, but I'll let the scoring panelists begin with their feedback if they'd like, or if they need me to buy time, I can
I'll
chat a
start.
little bit.
I finished.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Adams.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Adams. I am an attorney in private practice. I have my own law firm and I do estate planning work. And I just want to say I'm always just so impressed with seeing high school students do what you do. And I kept having to remind myself, these are high school students because you all present like you were college or law school or beyond. So kudos to you all as to, to everything that you did. And I just wrote a few notes here, and essentially I said everyone was very articulate. They were knowledgeable about the case, lots of personality. Between the Avery, which, okay, give me a minute. I forget who played Avery, but I have it written down.
Charlie Jones, I think.
Charlie Jones, yes. He was appropriately contrite. So did an amazing job. And I also thought, and I hope I pronounce it right, is it Galilea? Galilea. Okay, yes. You were just amazing too, all of you guys were. And I also had a check mark next to Grace playing Professor Owen. So, you all just brought that personality in and I loved it. I said you owned your roles and your characters. And the only thing else that I would say, just in terms of keeping this in mind, is slowing down. So I'm from New York, and New Yorkers are known for, just talking super fast. But sometimes in order to make sure that we're all on the same page, just be conscious of taking a breath and slowing down. And I know, especially in the beginning, where all the nerves are just completely amped up at that point, just be aware and conscious of that. Other than that, I think you all did an amazing job. And again, kudos to you all and to your coaches and to, the loved ones in your lives, because they had to put up with you for all of this time. So congratulations, job well done.
Thank you. Mr. White, would you like to make any remarks and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm still going through a little bit of the scores, but I can take a quick break here. So my name is Rob White. I'm a criminal prosecutor here in Adams County with the DA's office. And I would echo what's been said by everybody so far. Definitely very impressed with all of your preparation and your confidence and the way you carried yourself throughout the trial. It was really, really great to see. Every year I say the same comment, which is that some of the preparation that you all have put in is more preparation than I see with real attorneys in different courtrooms. So I hope you all are very proud of yourselves for the work that you've put in so far. And I wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you.
I'm happy to go next. My name is Linda Siderius. I'm a trial lawyer who's getting toward the end of her career. Been in practice for about 40 years, doing civil litigation, not criminal prosecutions or defense. I echo a lot of what has already been said. You're all remarkably well prepared and confident. I watched a lot of mock trial when my daughter was going to the high school, and she did mock trial for 4 years. And then that's how I became involved in being a judge. A couple of comments. One is I thought both sides had good themes, and you brought that out in your openings and your closings. I didn't hear the theme so much in your questions and in your cross-examination. And I think you could really bring those out a lot more in some very specific questions that really emphasize those themes, because I thought they were good. I thought Ms. Adams mentioned speed. A couple of you I felt were scripted and we're kind of rushing through. I know you're timed and I know you really have to be conscientious of time, but I, as a trial lawyer, like things to be a little bit more ad lib, I think, and thinking on your feet. And I felt sometimes you had rehearsed too much, but that's a balance that you have to strike. But I thought the other thing I would just say is in some of the answers to objections, you sort of repeated what you had asked the witness, or and really you need to go to the rule. You've got to rely on those rules, and you need to be able to cite those rules. So I would just again emphasize, know your rules and know them dead on. Rule 403, 702, what is it? And how does it relate to the question that you're getting an objection to? So those would be my comments.
Anybody else like to speak?
If I can just add a quick comment related to the speed issue. So I did notice in a few different examinations, there were some questions that were repeated. And I could tell, yeah, you were working off a script, but also it seemed that built into that script, there was some repetition. And so if you're looking for ways to maybe make the questioning a little bit more efficient so that you can slow down and still fit within your time frames, going back and looking through those scripts for any like repeated questions or repeated comments or anything like that might be a good place to start.
I would just add that in responding to objections, what I would do when I was preparing for trial is I kind of could anticipate where I would get objections. And I would write my responses in the margin so that I was prepared. So if you know that something's going to be objected to as relevancy, have your response ready. You know, this is relevant because it shows the witness's bias and credibility is always at issue. Just this case problem is designed with certain objections that should be made. And so you can anticipate what your response will be, and that should make you a little bit more comfortable. Also, don't hesitate to use voir dire for expert witnesses to bring out bias. It's a great way to start off by discrediting the witness. So some of you waited until into the cross-examination to bring out bias of a witness. You can use voir dire, which is an opportunity to challenge their expertise. But what you're really doing is you're showing the jury everything this witness is going to be telling you in a minute is hogwash, so you can really use that as an advantage. And you won't really get objected to because you are allowed to voir dire and question the qualifications of the expert witness. But I liked your organization. I liked how you organized your examinations. You did good signposting. You told us where you were going to be going, because the jury really needs something spelled out and to know what we're going to be focusing on and talking about. And you guys did a good job with that. All the witnesses were really good, really engaging. I know it's difficult to stay in character, but you all did great with staying in character. Had a strong presence, I agree. And it's clear how much work you put into this, and I know you appreciate, and we as well, the coaches' time in helping you and the parents' time in supporting you. you know, they talk about in this problem that it's just an activity. It's not just an activity. I know how much time and effort you put into it, and it shows. So congratulations on getting through the first round. Do you guys have any questions for any of us? And you don't have to. It's not no obligation. But if you had any questions, happy to answer them for you.
I just want to add one final thing. I was just thinking, you know, we've all been launched into this new world, and your generation is probably most adept in terms of balancing it. But I want to say again, shout out to you guys, kudos, because, you know, we might fumble around with the technology, but you all make it look really easy. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
Yeah, and you know, we're having to adapt in the courts and in the law to this technology, and it's really challenging. And I can appreciate that you know, grew up with a lot of this technology, but you did make it look easy. And you know, just so you're aware, this is really what's happening. You know, I so far haven't been in part of any virtual trials, but I've been part of virtual preliminary hearings, and I know Mr. White's probably been part of motions hearings, and you've adapted very well. So if you don't have any questions, I won't sign out of here until the scoring panelists have let me know that they've submitted their scores. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thanks again. Good luck to you the rest of the competition. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have the scoring panelists all submitted everything?
Yep.
Yeah, we're just waiting, I think, on the one from Linda.
Okay.
Can I get out though? Or
yeah, you're welcome to do what you need to do.
Take care,
and same with you, Judge Wheeler. I can stay on.
Thank you. Okay. I won't end the meeting, but I'll try to leave the meeting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're back?
I think the magistrate was asking if we'd all submitted our.
Yeah, and did you already submit yours?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, you're good to go then.
Alrighty, thanks.
Yeah. And Linda, were you able to find the link when I emailed it to you?
Yeah, sorry, it was my technology here. I'm about to finish, so I'll be done in a sec. Yeah,
no
sorry.
worries.
Sorry.
I just wanted to check.